3 belts on the line. 2 of the most fearsome champions to ever lace up gloves. And one night that would prove who was the better fighter. When Manny Pacquiao and Juan Manuel Marquez agreed to pit their skills against each other in a championship unification bout, little did they know that it would be the beginning of one of the greatest rivalries in boxing. Up there with Ali versus Frazier, or Sugar Ray Robinson versus Jake LaMotta. In some ways, both men were very similar, and in some ways, they couldn't be further apart. Both men had a lot of pride in their countries, and vice versa. Manny was the pride of the Philippines, and Marquez the pride of Mexico. Both men had grown up in bad neighborhoods, and had found their purpose and their living in boxing. Despite the financial incentive, both men seemed to be true warriors at heart, reveling in the thrill of the fight. However, the two could not be further apart on how they went about it. Pacquiao was a high-volume pressure fighter. His punching output alone could overwhelm his opponents, resulting in death by 1,000 cuts. Despite his endless torrent of blows, his punches never lacked power. And of course, there was Pacquiao's left hand, which seemed to have otherworldly power. Combined with his bizarre angles and nuanced lead hand, crafted with the help of coach Freddie Roach, Pacquiao had garnered a reputation as a force of nature, a boxer to be respected and feared. Marquez was the rare kind of skilled counterpuncher who could lead just as easily as follow. Not only did he antagonize his opponents into overcommitting by constantly probing and picking at them using in and out footwork, but he loved to goad them into long, intense exchanges. Marquez was sheer grit and will. The kind of boxer who preferred to put himself and his opponent into dangerous situations. Because he knew when the cards were down, it was his competitor who would be dealt the bad hand and fold. Understandably, the fight gained a lot of interest, and not because there was yet any heated rivalry between the two. If anything, fans were complaining at the lack of trash talk and the downright respectful, immaculate conduct of each fighter.
Marquez, he trained hard, and he won't lead his countryman down. And me too. I don't want to disappoint my countrymen.
Instead, the interest came from the fearsome reputation of the two warriors, and the hopeful imaginings of what would happen when these berserk but crafty titans of the sport met inside of the ring. The pressure fighter and the aggressive counterpuncher would pit their two iconic styles against each other. It was anyone's guess what would happen. As most expected, fans did not need to wait long to see some action. Just halfway through the first round, Pacquiao landed a solid 1-2, sending Marquez flying so hard to the canvas that he slid to a stop. Marquez was up right away, and Pacquiao went in for the kill. Marquez kept his cool and threw well-placed counters, but even so, he was sent tumbling to the floor once again only 20 seconds later. Like so many others, Marquez had been entirely unprepared for the ridiculous speed and insane distance of Pacquiao's rear hand. Pacquiao pulled these off in part by leaning far forward, driving his face directly into Marquez's lead hand, but betting that he was good enough to just slip the punch, even as he threw with full force. And while it's not clear if this was a built-in feature or a happy accident, Pacquiao's jab set up his left very well on both knockdowns by either pulling or knocking Marquez's rear hand out of the way. Regardless, Marquez once again got up. So composed, he appeared completely unfazed. Pacquiao looked once more to end the night early, but astonishingly, he didn't have to chase Marquez, who stood toe-to-toe with him and threw bombs. But for all his bravery, Marquez did seem unsteady, and he was soon clinging to the ropes, where Pacquiao nailed him to the canvas with one final cross. But Marquez was a man of focus, commitment, and sheer Mexican will. Not only did he rise up to his feet, he spent the remainder of the round swinging for the fences. He even landed some well-placed counters before the bell sounded the end of the round. Marquez had survived, but no one could have expected what happened next. Round 2 started off with a bang, Pacquiao partially connecting with his first left and then stepping full force into his second, which missed. But then, Marquez countered, slamming a hard rear uppercut to the body and flowing right into another rear uppercut to the chin. Now it was Pacquiao's turn to back off. Manny's tendency to crouch at close range made it relatively easy for a skilled counterpuncher like Marquez to find his mark. His punches were still finding a home, but then, so were Marquez's. And so he punished Pacquiao, pounding shovel hooks into his exposed sides and intercepting his ducks with uppercuts. Despite this, Pac-Man's cross was still landing with enough consistency and power to make it hard for anyone to give the round to Marquez. The Mexican's parries were landing him counters when he timed them right. However, he was rarely able to get that timing as perfect as it needed to be. But all of that changed in the third, when Marquez stopped planting down and instead circled away every time Pacquiao tried to close the distance. This gave him the space and angle he needed for his parry to work. The primary threat greatly lessened. Marquez could pick his spots to throw riskier counters off of head movement. Rather than the swift conclusion to the first round's battle that Pacquiao had been looking for, it seemed that this was only the beginning of a much greater war. Over the next several rounds, Marquez almost completely neutralized Pacquiao's offense and dealt out a lot of damage while doing so. Marquez's ability to turn with Pacquiao and stay sharp under fire helped him to follow Manny as he tried to disengage. He would even shift into southpaw to catch him when he tried to exit the exchange. And while Juan was busy degrading Pacquiao's angular movement with brutal body shots, he somehow still found the time to set up hard lead hook counters. The Filipino's offense now blunted, Marquez started building on his own offense. He used a simple strategy as old as boxing itself. He would alternate between throwing rear body hooks and rear head hooks, making it difficult for Pacquiao to discern where Marquez's looping haymakers were going. In the sixth, a head hook rocked Pacquiao, who retreated to the ropes. As unlikely as it was, Marquez was evening out the scorecard, erasing Pacquiao's first 3-round knockdowns. And more importantly, he was dealing major damage. Things were looking exceedingly bad for the esteemed champion. But in round 7, the fight took another unexpected turn. Roach advised Pacquiao to double jab before throwing his rear hand. Roach has a long history of pulling fighters out of the fire, even giving MMA great GSP crucial corner advice that led to a knockout. But after the Filipino champion again got countered immediately after executing Roach's plan, it was up to him to take back the fight. And so, Pacquiao began to counter Marquez's counters. lengthening the already lengthy exchanges until he paid Marquez back with interest. Even though Pacquiao often took a hard shot first, he seemed to have decided that he would get the last word of the fistic argument. For the first time in several rounds, Marquez was no longer in total control of the fight. Manny's strategy seemed untenable in the long term, or at the least, very unwise. But there was a method to Pacquiao's madness. He had never actually given up on defense. He had just fought on anyways if it failed. And over the next few rounds, he got much better at anticipating and timing Marquez's counters, meaning that he could execute the same strategy from the 7th while taking much less damage. He mostly relied on in-and-out footwork from mid-range. He would attack from a reasonable distance, evade Marquez's counter, and then, if possible, step back in again. His head movement and high guard kept him safe when his footwork wasn't enough. At the same time, he gave Marquez's direct offense much more respect than before, backing up and circling away rather than constantly pressing forward. It had taken several rounds, but now both men had learned to respect the other's talent. During the breaks, Marquez's coach warned him to keep his hands up, then begged him not to lose any more rounds. Going into the 10th, it was once again Marquez's turn to take back the fight. Marquez put in the work in the next round, following Pacquiao when he tried to angle out of exchanges and throwing endless combinations. For all that, Pacquiao proved to have surprisingly great defensive head movement. And the round was hard to call. So too was the next round, although Marquez seemed to be getting the better of Pacquiao more often. The pressure fighter's reduced work rate leaving him open to counters. That said, the judges really had their work cut out for them trying to decide which rounds went to which fighter. Any veterans of the sport must have known that everything would most likely come down to the 12th and very last round. Both men fought hard, and both men landed. But Pacquiao seemed to have more left in the tank. He was ultimately landing the sharper, harder shots of the round. But Marquez was always dangerous. The seconds counted down. Both men still looking for a knockout. 30 seconds. 20 seconds. 10 seconds. And then the bell sounded the end of the fight. The two embraced and then eagerly awaited the judge's decision. The first judge scored it 115 to 110 for Pacquiao. The second scored it 115 to 110 for Marquez. And the third scored it 113 to 113 for a split decision. Now, the last judge had accidentally not counted one of Pacquiao's knockdowns on his scorecards, and his oversight inadvertently set in motion one of the greatest rivalries in sports history. These two gladiators would fight 3 more times, each fight just as exciting and inspiring as the first. Stay tuned to see them all here. From The Modern Martial Artist, this has been David Christian, wishing you happy training.